to go ahead and start with our next session from UCL, Peter Coveney. Peter's been wondering, where's all the AI content? He's going to provide it right now.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to talk for a little while about human digital twins. Because of the nature of the meeting and the fact that, for example, Brian made me submit these slides ages ago, I'll just sort of wing it a bit because I want to keep this on themes that have been coming up as we go. There's too much in here, but I am interested in how we bring high-performance computing and AI together, and this challenge where at the moment, as I was saying over lunch, the hype for AI just seems to be unending, and I foresee another 3 or 4 years of it at least before some reality checks kick in. I want to talk about it and high-performance computing. Mark, after all, in his first talk, was advocating using the two things together, and in this area, we surely have to do that. So let me just go ahead. So to kick off, we feel comfortable, this is HPC. This is just a nice set of supercomputers that we use in our own work, actually, and dating back quite a while. So in terms of GPUs, converting codes, we started doing that when Titan came into the frame. And then there was Summit in particular, and these two exascale machines as they now are in the US. We have access through a DOE Insight Award at very large scale, and including some time that's supposed to kick off in Q4 this year on Aurora, but it's slipping, so we're not yet doing anything on that machine. Supermooc NG is an interesting, one of the big machines in Germany. It's at Leibniz Rechenzentrum in Garching, and we make use of that as well. So a lot of the work I'm talking about is actually the consequence of European collaborations that have been screwed up by Brexit and other things in recent times, but have sort of been flying for a while. So what's this digital twin vision that I want to advocate for human medicine? So as I will promote at the end slide, if I get there and Mark allows me to show it, I wrote a book called Virtual You, which was published last year, which is aimed at the kind of interested and informed general public about this. Again, I said this in a question, possibly yesterday, or was it this morning, that what goes on with medics when they try to make decisions on people is that they look at them and they're thinking of how they fit against all the people they've treated before, and that's typically what they do. It's not particularly scientific. Sometimes they end up making measurements, but it's not that common. But that principle of what I say the equivalent of if you were in a car, hopefully not a self-driving one, because I still can't believe they're really going to work. But if you were to drive a car and you spent all your time looking in the rear mirror to determine where you were going next, that's the equivalent of what happens in medicine today. Well, the bad news is in AI, that's exactly what it does as well. It collects lots of data from the past, and so it's essentially doing a similar thing, and we can do better than that is the contention, as I'm saying, because the idea of digital twins as we have it is we're actually looking at individual patients using their data largely to determine themselves rather than comparing it with other people's. What's the background to this? Digital twins, just to remind those who are not familiar, probably the most challenging digital twin project I think globally today might be the one called Destiny or Destination Earth. It's an EU project which is designed to produce digital twins of planet Earth, which is, of course, a problem of massive societal and economic and other interest because of the issues around global warming and so on. And the idea here is that you have the Earth, you have measurements that are being made of it all the time, and you want to use models to predict where it's going. And this is the key idea of a digital twin, that you have the real thing, that's the analog, although I like analog computers as well. There's going to be confusion if we're not. The analog is us, the real world, and the digital is the computer-based version of it. And the digital twin is meant to develop in a virtuous circle, in that your model might not be too good initially, but with the ingestion of data from all kinds of sources, you can get your models to start behaving in the correct way. And then you get into a virtuous position where if your models are good enough, they can actually make predictions, and sometimes you take notice of what those predictions are and carry out actions. This is an ambitious thing, but actually it's only an extrapolation of what happens every day with weather forecasting. If we believe in weather forecasts, we need high-performance computers, and we predict tomorrow's weather today because we use a very large supercomputer. Unfortunately, the Met Office messed up its last procurement, so we're now running our predictions on Australian computers for the moment. But that's just a side story. And we run ensembles of simulations because there's this intrinsic property with most classical systems, of which fluid dynamics is a clearly paradigm case. You have turbulence, which is underpinned by chaos, and that means that even though you thought the equations were deterministic, any uncertainty in their initial conditions or variations in the parameters can make the predictions go off in very different directions. So we need distributions. Remember, I'm saying this because it's an analogy with what's going to happen in medicine. We have to do the same thing there. We're never going to predict something categorically. It'll be some probabilistic prediction of this is what we should do. But the idea is, I want tomorrow's weather today. I don't want to know tomorrow's weather in 3 months' time. So don't give me a desktop machine to try and do this. I need powerful computers. And the body, well, which one's more complicated, a model of the Earth or the human body? Of course, we have to deal with many human bodies if we're doing this individually, whereas there's only one Earth. This is the picture of what I'm getting at with dynamical instability. You'll never run one simulation. You run typically 50 or more of these things, and you end up with some kind of probability distribution, which is the secret to why weather forecasting has become quite successful. It doesn't say with certainty something's going to happen. It'll tell you maybe 65% it'll rain tomorrow. Actionable outcome, I reach for my umbrella and put it in my bag to go to work. Think of what you could do in the biological case if you can get a prediction that will be life-saving, perhaps. So this is the problem. The predictions are short-term with chaotic systems. Unless you keep correcting them to keep them on the fiducial sort of path, they will start to depart from the behavior of the real system. And that's why you use all these sensors and you redo the calculations regularly. So the difference between a weather forecast and a climate model should be clear. It's like accident and emergency versus longevity. Here, climate prediction is much tougher, but it's still using similar principles. All the mathematical components are basically the same as they are in a weather forecast, but I'm predicting over decades to centuries. With a human, what we really want to do in the long term is predict the life course ahead of time over long periods, and we haven't got anywhere near that yet. But that would be the equivalent of the climate. So this sort of thing is going on already today and elsewhere, perhaps in Florida. This is an example of the sort of predictive capability that weather forecasting has for hurricanes and other emergencies. In the US weather forecasting centers, this tells people where the hurricane is going to land several days ahead of time, what's going to be dangerous to the people and their property, and take action. So incidentally, this was a case in point as I go along with the medical scenario. We have a cultural problem here, and that is that medics and life scientists generally don't do predictive modeling. In general, it's forbidden. If you want to get a high-profile publication as a scientist, you tag on to an experimental team and you explain what they did after the event, and then you might come up with it in a top-end medical journal. But if you try to submit a paper which makes a forecast, no chance at all. They must see something before they believe it. Now, clearly, if they go on like that, we'll never see the vision that I'm putting in front of you, that we are able to predict things before they happen and somebody does something. And that's where we're going with regulatory authorities. The FDA is by far the most advanced today in terms of defining what you require in silico medicine to put down some predictive tool that can then be used to take decisions. This is just now starting to happen. But this was a sort of picture of what happened back in 2020 in COVID. Actually, we suddenly saw lots of biomedical predictions on the front pages of our newspapers, which we'd never normally do, because we needed to know what might happen after COVID took off. And this is just an iconic image. I haven't got anywhere near enough time to go through it in detail, where we analysed Neil Ferguson's code, which initially was a piece of spaghetti that only he and his PhD students could work with, and ended up being converted into a code that was put out across the whole UK for inspection. But our purpose there was to look at uncertainty quantification, which is an essential component of any of these predictive models. I can't just say this is what's going to happen and I expect you to believe me. I need some sort of certification, and that comes from UQ, or uncertainty quantification. And by the way, I will be raising the sights on my blunderbuss for the AI people, if there are any in here, because I never hear them talking about uncertainty quantification for any of their predictions in the sense that I mean it. They think they're exceptional. We don't, because we do AI, we don't need to be quantitative. There was a talk yesterday that actually mentioned someone was doing uncertainty quantification on large language models, and that's something I would be particularly interested in. But in any case, here, the main point was that Neil Ferguson, like someone running an astrophysics, I don't know, an N-body simulation or a molecular dynamics one, just reported this dotted line in report 23 that went before the Prime Minister from the committee called SAGE, and it was on the basis of that and other stuff that Boris Johnson decided we better go into lockdown or lots of people would die. But in reality, this plot actually shows what happens when you have uncertainty in the parameters that are in the model. The first thing I ask everyone, and no one who does AI is excluded from this, the first question I ask them is, how many parameters are in your model? So I asked Neil Ferguson how many were in his, and he went, he didn't know. And about a month later, I told him he had 940. And the business is, what do you do with all of those? But in any case, the full story is here. The main message is you have to reckon with distributions in the same way as a weather forecast. And that thing on the right-hand side is an example of the distributions of something which is literally deadly serious, the number of cumulative deaths that are occurring as a function of days after the virus starts to infect people. And lots of things are in this model I haven't got time to worry about, but it's a biomedical case. And if you do this analysis carefully, you're able to isolate which of the parameters are actually the key ones that you might need to act on if you're trying to suppress the spread of the virus. The same kind of thing we want to do in medical research, but in any area of science, that's what we're interested in. Quickly on the biomedical cases I want to talk through. Drug discovery is a topic that I'm interested in. Now, nobody who works in the drug industry could stand up here and tell a story that they'd be proud of, because the normal situation there is it takes 10 years, $3 billion to produce one drug, and you're only successful 4% of the time when you do it. And probably a very small fraction of those cases will be supposedly applying to everyone, but the concept is one size fits all. The best drugs usually work for about 50% of the population. And if it's in cancer, normally it's far less than that. So it's a great mess. And my view is the only way we're going to do better is actually by using IT using modeling and simulation, and AI, other things, to get these predictions out first before we spend time doing testing, putting things into humans where they fail in late-stage clinical trials. So the main thing here is that we're doing stuff on a kind of molecular level at very large scale in the work I do. I'm interested in trying to put the full preclinical workflow onto a very large machine like Frontier, where we're just launching lots of explorations of different proteins and different drug candidates, all done with UQ, uncertainty quantification, in place. Remember what I was saying earlier, it may mean that I have to do lots of individual simulations to get the error bars down. And in the middle of that, though I don't think I'm going to show that here because I can't remember what's in my slides, there is an interesting combination of the physics-based methods that predict binding affinities with a wonderful and wacky generative active learning piece of software that's open source from AstraZeneca, where you can feed your nice predicted model behaviors of some of the simple molecules into the AI system, and then it actually generates new molecules, really amazingly, which don't relate to the ones you were working with before, but which are purportedly tighter binders. And that's the kind of thing we're interested in, because then we can interact around this loop iteratively. You can put filters in which tell you whether the molecules are synthesizable in the laboratory, what the toxic impact of these things will be. So it's really, for me, a compelling case of let's try and get this technology into place such that it can then be picked up and developed with smaller number of compounds than is currently the case. Chemists end up having to make lots of these things, and that's very time consuming. I'm moving up a scale here, and this is to other levels because I'm talking about digital twins of the human body. There isn't going to be a digital twin of me anytime soon. It's not as if one will come in from that door over there and take over this lecture from me. Let's be under no illusions, that's not going to happen for a very long time. What we're really talking about at the moment is digital twins of components of the human body, let's say disease cases, from the molecular end to, which I was alluding to partially there, to organ systems and beyond. Whole human, and then lots of humans. And I'm trying to give you lots of humans, epidemiology, infectious disease. You can't avoid having to handle many, and in some cases that's by agent-based models, such as Ferguson's, but in others, I may be able to get you a slide or two which show what we're trying to do in terms of in silico clinical trials of people where people aren't being subjected to the trial, but virtual representations of them are. So this type of picture is thrown up from a big EU HBC Centre of Excellence thing that I was running for several years called Comp Biomed, and different people in different labs in Europe here responsible for developing different sorts of models of organ systems and details, for example, of blood flow. In the case of us in UCL, we have a code called HemLB, and that's sort of represented on the right-hand side, but it's advertised in coupling, because we're trying to couple it now with ALIA. And ALIA is the probably the most sophisticated heart model that's ever been developed. It was developed ab initio in the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, so it was always designed to run on supercomputers. It has the beating heart, the electrophysiology, and the fluid dynamics going into it. So it's already being used for helping to design medical devices, and is the most advanced and, I'd say, accurate representation of an organ system we have today, where it's being used in those studies that I mentioned in silico. The one on the right is actually, as I say, HemLB coupled to it. So both of these things are high-performance computing codes. They run on supercomputers, and you know, in the fullness of time, as we build up a virtual human, we have to put lots of organs together, so it's challenging to couple these things. I've seen that, Mark, and I'm trying to pay attention. So there are a number of other things going on. This is for the HBC aficionados who care. I don't have time to go into all the details, but the HemLB code was originally developed as a CPU-only thing that ran on UK machines, and then on the Superbook NG machine that I mentioned in Leibniz Rechenzentrum, has then been migrated over to these GPU-based systems. And just to whet your appetite, you know, there's some scaling data if you really want to know on the full production partition. There's about 80,000 GPUs, if you count them correctly, all being deployed on a single instance of the code, running at the large enough scale and high enough resolution that you can support it. And why do we do that? Because we want high fidelity and we want the answers in a hurry. So these things have happened. They're going ahead continuously at the moment. This is the case of the heart. This has been, the software that's developed and commercialized to do heart modeling for education and training of medics now. Part of the message I'm trying to imply here is that we need medics to sort of get more interactive with modeling and predictive systems. These are cases in point. I have slides here on the virtual trials, so I'm just making us understand what the motivation for this is. Historically in the biological sciences, when people talk about models, they don't mean models in the way I normally think of them. They're talking about, say, models of humans that would be mice, rats, dogs, cats. So animal models is what they mean. And it should be clear to you, I hope, without me having time to go into it, that this whole approach is largely eradicating the need for animal models, which is itself a good thing, because we can use sufficiently high fidelity modeling and simulation that we know we can get better predictive capabilities out of the in silico methods than the animal models. And in particular, a colleague of mine called Blanca Rodriguez, who's in Oxford, has won at least 2 awards for being able to demonstrate that. So animal models are sort of going away. And what I was alluding to earlier, and I'm trying to hint at here, is we can build populations now of these models. So far, I haven't really mentioned AI seriously. There is a way of doing building these models, which is to start from a population and then kind of build a representative set by varying the parameters that exist in a starting model. So this work is done by Mariano Basquet and his team at BSc. They've got a startup company called Elem Bio, which is now commercializing this stuff. And these particular heart models aren't actually human ones in the sense they're synthetic data, but they could be human. In the future, you have to imagine you'll have your own heart model somewhere, and if you wish to participate in a human, in a virtual trial at no risk to yourself, you can denote your parameters, and you will be entered into it. So these models are being made. This is a throwback. Unfortunately, it looks like Trump is coming back into power at the moment. But 3 or 4 years ago, he was talking about using anti-malarial tablets and medicines to cure COVID. And this is just a quick tour of what happens. You can test what happens to virtual patients' hearts if they're subjected to Trump's therapy. And this is I haven't got the time to go into it, but essentially you can set up a clinical trial in this way and then see what happens. And the beauty of this is, as you may realize, we're not very good at treating people on an equal footing in the healthcare system. Most real data still human, white men. But here we can construct women's hearts quite easily as well as men's. They have different characteristics, and you can imagine they can all be individualized. But what you do see when you run these trials is, in fact, this table, too much data to take in, except that the columns on the last 3 have the virtual population from the in silico trial I'm trying to convey to you, and clinical data that was run on real people for n equals 90 people and n equals 200. The virtual population is 64. And things like hydroxychloroquine were what Trump was telling us we should be taking, and that does cause certain sorts of pathologies in hearts. And broadly speaking, the percentages of the populations found in the in silico versus the real world cases are similar here. And if I can go forward, this is just a specific example of the left bundle branch block pathology that can develop, particularly in females, women, in their hearts as a result of taking 800 milligrams of this therapy that Trump advocated. And so you actually start seeing the kinds of specific pathologies arising for men and women that you would get in a real population, but at no risk to themselves. This is talking, remember, about building up the scale. If it's a virtual human, I want to connect all the organ systems, eventually the vasculature, the heart, the lungs, and other things, and that's coming in the longer run. Then there's this problem of reliability and reproducibility, which I touched on before. We've developed software, which I'll talk about in the Excalibur meeting tomorrow, which is designed to support interrogation of one's codes to see whether it's reliable or not. And there are components of that, it's all open source, that are being used in many different domains at the moment, including the biomedical. And I'm going to run out of time to tell you about the great story of what happens if I do AI to get involved in this game, because I might want to build proteins using AI. Nobel Prize came out last week for AlphaFold. It's a great way of predicting a three-dimensional structure. Now I'm going to ask you how many parameters are in AlphaFold, and does anyone know the answer? I rhetorically ask this question every time I give a talk, so if you've been in a talk by me, you already know the answer. Any idea? Does anyone want to guess? Shout. Yeah, you've gone too far now. In the Excalibur meeting last year, someone said 42, which is the secret of the universe. But actually, the answer is about 100 million, 10 to the 8. So it's roughly a billion. You're already on the large language models, which are a trillion. And so the problem is, if I want to do uncertainty quantification on this, I'm dead in the water. And that's the weakness of machine learning. It has so many parameters that it will fit anything, and that's why it works, because I'm just fitting stuff. But then I stare at a box of parameters and I have to say which ones matter, and I do not know what to do. The consequence of that is I cannot be sure when the next unknown primary sequence rolls up, unless it's very similar to the ones we saw earlier, that it's actually going to be reliable. So people will still have to do experiments if they want to design a drug to get that structure. And that's the kind of situation we face the whole time here. But that's the workflow I mentioned earlier. I don't have time to go into all the details of it, which combines AI, physics-based stuff, docking and other things, and is now running on of the order of 1,000 nodes on Frontier, but should be able to scale up beyond that. And this is the picture of the AI plus physics-based thing working. We published a paper a few months ago on that, which just shows the message in the diagram on the right is that the free energies of the things that the AI system is predicting are drifting to the left, and they're all new structures, different from the ones we saw before. So it's kind of exciting. Here's the problem about AI, creating human digital twins. It's a method for doing correlations. It doesn't tell you anything directly about what's going on. It's an inference-based method. It has the limitation that you need full uncertainty quantification, and we don't know how to do it on these systems. We talk about the same problem that came up this morning of healthcare for individuals. We see in AI systems that are already being deployed in the NHS that they show biases because they underrepresent some people in the population. And it's just being allowed to be deployed without due care, a mystery to me. There's one big proposal in the UK that's funded, a new AI hub. It says it's doing CHAI. CHAI means T for most of us, but there it stands for Causal Healthcare Artificial Intelligence. The opening sentence of their hub says, we agree that existing AI just doesn't work for these problems and we need to develop a new one. So they're going to develop a new one which explains everything. Hey folks, that's the scientific method at play. So let's see how they get on with that. And with that, I'll just end by saying what we're after in the long term is health cars for people that can make truly useful predictions for them as individuals. And shamelessly, I just make a plug for my book at the end. If you want to hear all about it in detail, you can get that book from Princeton University Press. With that, I want to stop and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. I have time for one question. If anyone's got one question?
Yes, it's great talks. Just want to know that how you are trying to bring models and AI together into a single system.
Yes, so the idea is that first of all, we have individual models that we must be clear of, highly accurate and have high fidelity in them, or they're never going to pass go with the FDA, all right? And the FDA is interested in mechanistic models, and most medics are. In fact, you need to understand why therapies work, so you must have a good mechanistic model. So we're spending a lot of time on that because medicine doesn't have